Hello and welcome to Truthloader Live. It's 4 PM, it's Tuesday, so it's once again our featured vlog feature, and we are having a discussion around the topic of the vlog today, and that is Syria. The question we're asking today is this: how accurate are Western perceptions of the conflict in Syria? Now, the conflict in Syria has been going on for nearly 2 years now. The United States government and the UK have both publicly asked for Assad to step down, whilst the Russians have been more sympathetic towards the Assad regime, sending aid, and their media generally being more sympathetic to the cause. Adding to that uncertainty surrounding what's going on in Syria, the people fighting in Syria are becoming very splintered, and there are some suggestions that once the battle is done, factions within Syria may begin fighting each other. Running alongside all of this are Western perceptions of this conflict. How accurate are they? Are they oversimplified? Do we believe there are just two sides at work inside Syria? What are your perceptions of what's going on in Syria? If you're interested in the debate, leave a comment on the YouTube video, because we will be able to put them to our panel. So I should probably introduce you to our panel. We have 3 guests today. We have Yasmin Al-Talawi. She is a freelance journalist and documentarian, and she's been working in Syria for over a year, and she's traveled extensively within the country during the conflict. She's currently working on a documentary inside Syria and doing freelance reporting on the crimes taking place inside of the country. We also have Phelan Mahan. He has lived in Syria for 2 years during the 80s, and he now works as a journalist who specialises in the Middle East. And we have Syrian girl partisan. She is of Sunni Muslim background, and her family was part of the ruling class in Syria before they were deposed from power by the current Ba'athist coup of the current government. She now runs an activist YouTube blog called Syrian Girl Partisan. So if you have any questions to ask of our panelists below, do leave them in a comment. We will be able to put them to them. So I'd like to start with you, Yasmin, if that's possible, and ask you this question. In your experience, what is the most misunderstood aspect of the conflict in Syria?
I feel all aspects are really misunderstood from within Syria. There's so much misunderstanding on who the opposition is. I think that's the #1 problem. With the limited access for journalists to travel freely, it's hard to get an aspect of the whole country as to what exactly is the problem. The opposition is extremely divided in all of the groups that exist, and that's very misunderstood, I think, mainly in the Western media.
And do you think that the Western narrative is simplified in a way?
I do, very much so. Syria has been compared so much like other countries in the Middle East. It's been compared like other wars in the Middle East, whereas Syria was a very different Muslim country, not like other wars, not like Libya, not like Egypt, nothing like this at all. And it gets compared too much to these revolutions when it's a completely different issue of what's happening in Syria.
Perhaps we could go to you. Please do correct me if I've pronounced your name incorrectly.
No, you're almost there, Phelan.
I do apologise. You lived in Syria for some time. Perhaps you could give us an insight into what Syria was like before this conflict started.
Okay, so I lived in Syria in 1983 and 1984 when I was sort of 10 and 11, and we lived in Damascus. My father was a United Nations observer on the Golan Heights. At that time, Syria wouldn't have been as open as it is today. Well, not today, but until recently. I suppose one of the things that struck me about it was how big Damascus was. I came from a small town. I'd moved into this great and very old city. I was struck by the school system, which I found quite regimented. I wasn't part of the Syrian school system, but while it was quite good, I mean, I saw a lot of kids going around in sort of, military-style uniforms. I mean, no different than the Boy Scouts here, but it did seem to be stricter and a little bit more regimented. I mean, most of my memories from that time would be childhood memories. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how much relevance they would have to today.
And so what change have you seen there now? The situation in Syria is different. If we could maybe go just before this conflict started, what was Syria like as a country at that time?
Is that question for Amelia?
It is indeed. Sorry, Phelan, that's a question for you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon.
That's all right.
Well, one of my storyful colleagues went on his holidays to Syria sort of 3 years ago, and you know, they came down through Turkey. They had a fantastic time, and it was you know, the country before the revolution was essentially more open than it was before. Not you know, completely open or anything like that, but you know, people were coming in and going out, and it wasn't such a big deal as it was when we were young.
So how accurately do you think that the coverage has been of this conflict?
I'd be critical of nearly every media story I see, no matter what the topic, and I think that the Syrian conflict presents particular difficulties in terms of getting people on the ground, in terms of the reliance on second-hand reports, and you know, it's a complex situation. I think that the media haven't done a bad job, but I do think that you have to go to a lot of different sources in order to flesh out your picture of the situation. So you know, it's as valuable to listen to people that you disagree with, don't agree with, half agree with. You've got to take in the information on Syria from all sides, and there is a great diversity of opinion about what is a very complex and tragic situation.
Syrian girl partisan, or Mimi, if we could come to you. You at one time lived in Syria. You now live in Australia. You blog extensively about the situation in Syria. You're very critical of the FSA. Why do you take such a strong position on the Free Syrian Army?
Well, I just want to, for a moment, go back to your previous question of what Syria was like before the war. I was in Syria. I lived there for about 3 months just before the war began, so about a couple of years before it began. And what I saw that Syria was gradually improving. The internet was introduced, the streets were getting better. Some of the reforms that the president had promised were being implemented. Now it's argued whether those reforms were done fast enough. You know, the media says that he's a reformer, but he didn't do it enough. So my whole reason for speaking out and blogging is because the media has been totally warping the events in Syria. They're making it out to be a democratic movement against a dictatorship. In fact, no, it is a Muslim Brotherhood movement against the dictatorship. And Muslim Brotherhood has been the main opposition group in Syria since the 60s and even perhaps before that. So it is this group of people that are backed by the West and NATO, which again, the Western media fails to mention because they don't really give any context or any of the bigger picture behind the struggle. So my position is to speak out for the Syrian people who are currently disenfranchised because the media is portraying this whole war as such a polarized event of pro-government, or either pro-government or you're anti-government, and there's nothing in between. In fact, there is something in between, and that's called being pro-Syria, and defending Syrian sovereignty and the nation against what has been for the last 2 years, the destruction of Syria due to a flow of insurgents and foreign fighters and jihadists from all across the Middle East. Thanks to
if we could go to sorry, Mimi, there's a connection problem just for the minute. If we give it a few moments, it may well recover. Yasmin, if we go to you, what do you make of those points that, well, Syrian Girl has said that the opposition inside of Syria is backed by the West? Is that something that you agree with?
No, it's definitely not something I would agree with. I mean, this uprising started, it was normal people like you and I, people with normal jobs, kids going to school, family people that, you know, ended up picking up weapons to defend themselves and what they feel. Of course, it's evolved a lot since then. It's changed. There's many other elements. There are extremist elements now. But the beginning of this, it was like what would happen in any country, really, when there's a war situation. People will pick up weapons to defend their families, to defend themselves. I certainly wouldn't agree it's a Muslim Brotherhood backing opposition. I definitely couldn't agree with that.
Phelan, what do you make of that? The Islamist nature within the rebels and the opposition inside Syria get much coverage. We have the rise of Jabhat al-Nusra, who analysts have say have come across from Iraq. They have heavy weapons. Is this something that gains much attention? Do you think people know much about this element of the conflict?
I think we have the media has focused on this aspect of it, but again, one of the great difficulties with the Syrian conflict is figuring out exactly who is who, exactly what is the chain of command, who is responsible, you know, for making various decisions, and this is all quite unclear. I mean, the best document that we have in our hands at the moment is the United Nations Commission of Inquiry into Syria report, which is based on some 1,500 witnesses. Now, no journalist has gone into that level of detail or compilation on the situation, and that's an extremely valuable document. But also, I mean, there is a problem in that document in that much of it is done from a distance because the Syrian government did not cooperate with the UN team for its reasons. So they were
Sorry, if you could, Phelan, perhaps you could give us a summation of what that document said. What was the findings of that piece of research?
Well, I suppose because it's a human rights document, it focuses on three main issues. The first is war crimes. The second are crimes against humanity, and the third are the sort of related concept of massacres. Its remit is to investigate every massacre, and it's, you know, it has looked at all those things. What it said was that both sides were responsible for war crimes, that there was a case, that there was evidence that the Syrian government or some people within it had a case to answer in terms of crimes against humanity. They mentioned the key term systematic and widespread attacks, and listed several crimes which fall under the category of crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute. I think one of the important things to note in the Syrian conflict is that the preponderance of firepower is on the government side. And this is another thing that the report noted. It said that the abuses committed by insurgent forces in Syria were no less grave than those committed by government, but that they were of a different scale entirely. You know, that's really the take home from it.
And Syrian girl Patterson, what do you make of that? And after you've made this point, we have another person who's joined us, and I'd like to go to you so you could introduce yourself and then maybe comment on some of the points raised. So what do you make of that? That the majority of the firepower is in the hands of the government, therefore they must be able to be doing more damage to their own country. Syrian girl.
Oh, you're speaking to me? I
yes,
just want to address.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just asked. Well, first of all, I want to address some of the things that Yasmin said, that this is not a Muslim Brotherhood-backed conflict. Well, it's interesting that she's here today showing her beautiful hair, whereas you can see pictures of her in Idlib wearing what is tantamount to a burqa. And the reason for that is, in Idlib, the rebel forces are in power, and what they are enforcing is Sharia law, which is one of the main reasons behind the revolution. So again, another point that she made is that the Western powers aren't backing this movement, whereas, you know, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UK and the US have pledged millions of dollars, and this is in the media on record, of funding to these insurgent elements, as well as, she said that the Muslim Brotherhood had nothing to do with it, the US-backed Syrian National Council that was created in March 2011 is 80% Muslim Brotherhood composition, Muslim Brotherhood members, even though, you know, its head is supposed to be secular. Majority of them, the bulk of them, are Muslim Brotherhood. So basically everything she said was flawed and wrong. And now, as for your other question, of course the government with the military of Syria does have more firepower, but how would you react when foreign fighters are flooding in from all corners of the Middle East into your land and setting off bombs, executing people based on their sect, because they are Christian or Alawite or Kurd or Durzi, how would you react? How would you expect your government to react? And they have reacted exactly as the Syrian people want them to react, to uproot this terrorist element.
If we could go to Rami, who's just joined us, if you could introduce yourself and perhaps respond to that exact point. How would you respond if some fighters arrived in your nation and began to perform these acts of trying to overthrow the government? Rami, we can't hear you. If you could click your microphone, we should be able to hear you. It'll be top right on your screen.
All right. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I think the fact that the dispute has gone this far makes it really hard to talk about this, because we have to jump back a few steps and actually what caused this. I mean, we're saying the lady there was just saying that people coming in from all corners of the Middle East and are fighting in Syria, and how would the government react to that? Well, if that was just a simple case and it was as broad as that, then if I was Bashar al-Assad, I would wipe them out. Okay, understood, but that's not what's happening. See, the problem now is that this is people that are arising from communities. And if we're not willing to, even in this conversation, accept that this is actual civilians that have risen, and if they're a bit fundamentalist after about 2 years of continuous shelling and continuous airstrikes, and before that, military crackdowns from door to door, taking people in and torturing them, if that's not something that then causes some sort of extremism, then I don't know what does. I mean, we're talking about an end level here. You're just talking about the facts on the ground now. If I'm to speak, I'm an opposition activist. If I'm to say the problems that I have with the opposition and the problems that I have with Jabhat al-Nusra and these groups on the ground that are actually causing some problems for us now, then I have some stuff that I think you and I will have in common. That's definitely the case. But we can't just measure this from the last few months of the uprising and say, okay, this is a situation. 2 years of continuous crackdown on their own civilians, and this is what you get. I mean, I'm a Syrian, and I lived in Damascus, and I can no longer be in Damascus now. Maybe because I'm a terrorist. Maybe this beard means I'm a terrorist. Maybe that's just the case.
No.
Maybe because you don't have a scarf on your head, then that means that you're just, you know, you're an open person. I have some open people I can show you. My sister doesn't wear a scarf on her head, and she's anti-government.
I'm a Muslim. And
right,
many
right.
friends
Please, I respected the fact that you were speaking.
I am not a pro-government person, so let me stop you there. I'm not saying you're a terrorist, but there are terrorists in Syria. And
Syria, so Mimi, sorry, we have a problem with the connection again.
I have to make this one point. I have to make this one point, that everybody here is operating under the assumption that the shooting only started after a government crackdown. In fact, the shooting started in March 2011, that when the first lot of soldiers and policemen were killed. So to say that people later took up arms after a government crackdown is garbage. It has no basis.
Can I just interrupt, please? Because I didn't.
That they picked up the guns.
Rami, please go ahead. One at a time, please. I knew this conversation was going to have cause a heated discussion. That's great, but please speak one at a time. Rami, if you could go ahead, and also state your name because you joined. Oh, we have connection problems. This is the problem with live broadcasting on Google Hangouts. Just for a moment, Yasmin, let's hear your thoughts on this. We're talking about the origins of this conflict. Now, the Western understanding generally, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll put this to you, was that there was an uprising inside of Syria, and Bashar al-Assad's regime began to crack down on that uprising, and this is where the conflict began. Is that an accurate portrayal of what happened inside Syria? That's the question to Yasmin.
Yes, I definitely feel that's accurate, definitely. It's always been a corrupt regime. Let's not forget what happened back in the 80s with his father, and, you know, the people were still trying to recover from those tragedies. We still don't if I could just one at a time speak, it would be great. I would like to just quickly respond because I think Syrian girl seems to care about my fashion sense in a war zone. I choose to wear the headscarf out of my choice to respect a country's religion when I'm in it. By no means has anyone ever tried to tell me you must wear this.
You don't have to wear the headscarf.
I don't, not at all. Nobody has ever told me to. It's my personal choice when I'm in that country.
It is the rebels' philosophy. Because you're afraid of what the rebels might do.
If I could come to you, I'd like you to try and clarify this point. Sorry guys, one at a time. I'd like you to try and clarify this point. We're talking about the origins of this conflict. It has been contested that the origins of this conflict were when Assad began to crack down on a popular uprising. Is there any credibility to that? And if so, how big is this popular uprising against Assad? How much support do the rebels and the opposition have inside of Syria? I realise that's two questions, but if you could start with the first, that'd be great.
Well, I think, you know, what Rami said was correct. You do have to rewind in this conflict. There's maybe four main turning points or, you know, times in the conflict that we must look at. In June of last year, the huge escalation of armed conflict that we've seen in Syria to this day really began in earnest, with an increase in sort of guerrilla-style attacks on government targets, but also the first use of air power against towns, cities, and villages across Syria. That was in June last year. If we rewind back to March 2011, this started this conflict in videos, which is what we do. We discover and verify videos. It started in much the same way as any of the other uprisings. Who was organising the protests, I can't tell you, but what I can tell you is lots of people came out and started chanting for change, then chanting for reform, chanting for the downfall of the regime. This, you know, the question of whether these people were mobilised by this party or that party or the other party is in a sense irrelevant to my job. What I can tell you is that they came out, and they came out in large numbers. If we fast forward to the summer of 2011, we saw incredibly, possibly the biggest demonstrations that we.
Phelan, if you could put some headphones in, we'll stop a slight feedback loop that we had there. I'd like to go back to Rami, if I could. Please describe the situation as you saw it in Syria. What was you said that at one time you were in Damascus and you lived there, but you no longer can live there. What led to that happening? Why did you have to leave?
I think my case is as common as many. I was wanted by the Syrian government, by the Air Force intelligence, because I was in touch with Western media. And I had to leave through the border. I couldn't leave through the airport because I'd be arrested. That was basically because I was taking part in demonstrations. I'd been reported against. I'd been filming them, and I'd been talking to Western media channels. I still go to Syria. I was in Syria last week. I'm only able to go in the northern region because it's liberated territory. We have problems with the fact that there's no control over what's going on in these areas anymore. It's not something we like to see. There is something called an extreme opposition that maybe I don't agree with. I think Syrian girl doesn't agree with them, and she doesn't agree with the more adequate opposition that are actually trying to find a solution. And I think that's the main problem. If we can look at this more sensibly and say that, you know, she's a Syrian, I'm a Syrian, we should be able to sit and actually talk about this. Sit and actually talk about this without there being that constraint above my head that says, if we want to talk, then the only way to talk is to keep Assad in power. I think that the main problem that we're facing with those that support Assad, and in particular minorities who worry about their future with every right to worry because of the messy situation that we're in now, that problem will just continue to go on. If we don't find a solution that says that minorities with the majority are able to actually sit down and talk, and this shouldn't mean those that support Assad and those that don't. It should just mean different sectors of society able to sit down and actually talk about this, whatever their beliefs are, whether they're extreme, whether they believe in God, they don't, they believe in different types of God. That's not the problem. The fact is that they have to sit down and actually talk about this and talk about a future Syria that doesn't have to revolve around one person that's in power. And that's the biggest dispute that we have in Syria, that some people would say that, okay, we would accept a country without Assad, but then you have Assad portraying, not saying, portraying that it's either me or it's a burnt down country, and that's what's happening at the moment. I understand that there's lots of details to this. There's much more than just the stuff that we see on Western media, and I think that's the problem with Western media. That it doesn't explain everything, and this frustrates people who support Assad. It frustrates the silent majority, that their voices are not being conveyed. Part of what we're working on right now is a project that actually reaches the other side and actually does convey their voices, because a future Syria is not one that just holds the Sunni population, for example, if we would say that was the majority of those taking part in the uprising. But there aren't enough initiatives like this. I agree that the West, to some extent, are making this harder for us as an opposition to do something and be closer to those with other beliefs in the country. And I have to pull back on this, that's the main problem. We're not able to talk, we're not able to dialogue ourselves, and not the sort of dialogue that the Syrian government is talking about, which
now,
makes
Mimi,
no
if
sense
I could put those points to you, how do you think people inside Syria can be better represented? There's a forum happening right here where two people inside Syria are talking to each other about how to best resolve the situation in their country. How can the situation in Syria be better represented?
Sure.
This question is to
That's
me.
the question for Mimi.
Oh, right.
First of all, one of the points that were made about the protest at the beginning, about the biggest protests by a long shot, millions strong across Syria, Damascus, Aleppo, were actually pro-government and pro-reform protests. These are protests that rejected foreign intervention in Syria as viewers of them on YouTube. The mainstream media probably didn't report on them as loudly as they reported on opposition protests. But the fact is, the silent majority, as I mentioned, the silent majority doesn't accept foreign intervention of our enemies in Syria, and our enemies are the ones who are occupying Syrian land. Israel
They
and
don't
its
accept
allies,
Assad
being
either.
the US, NATO, Saudi Arabia, Qatar.
Mimi, I'm really
So
sorry to have to cut you off, but the connection is echoing really badly. If you could put on some headphones or something to stop the echo, that would be great, and we will come back to you. But please do try and find some headphones, and we will come back to you. Phelan, I'd like to put that point that Mimi raised to yourself. There were pro-government rallies taking place in the last 18 months inside Syria. Is this something that you think was people in the West understand? Phelan, your microphone's turned up. If you could unmute yourself somehow, perhaps. Perhaps unplug the headphones that you placed in. No, the sound has gone. Well, let's put that point to Rami then. Rami, you interjected there.
Right.
You said that those protests and those demonstrations in support of Assad were represented in the West. Where had you seen those?
I totally agree with the lady. I'm sorry, I don't know the name. I think it's Mimi. There were demonstrations that were in support of the government. To say that that's not the case would be totally distorting the situation, and that's one big problem that we have in terms of dialogue. But the fact of the matter is that one side was allowed to demonstrate, the other side was not. And that sort of pulls away the ability. You're shaking your head there, and I got beaten the hell out of in a demonstration, and I was tortured for 3 days just for taking part in it.
I saw 30,000 people protest in Hama with the opposition, and they were there, and it was a peaceful protest.
Right. And then on the 1st of July, they just decided not to go out anymore because they changed their mind. But,
well, you know, the fact is that many people that went to those protests on both sides, there was shooting. And there were guns inside those demonstrations.
All right.
So
okay.
either it was Asian provocateurs or it was people
Mimi,
who were
if you could
armed
let
by
him finish,
people?
please let Rami finish his point about these protests that were or were not so well represented in the Western press. Rami, please go ahead. Oh, incidentally, Rami has now disappeared. Phelan, if we can hear you, I'd like to hear your views on this, about these protests and these gatherings in support of the Assad regime. Is this something you thought was widely reported in the West?
Hopefully you can hear me now.
I can. Super.
Sorry for the problems there. I mean, we saw the images of the big pro-government protests in Syria the same way we saw the images. It was pretty much the same time. It was July 2011. We saw those, on our TV screens side by side. The question of agent provocateurs and what exactly happened. I mean, in my own country, we've spent 20 years picking apart what happened at certain protests and how people came to be killed, and it's taken decades to get the truth out. What we saw in Syria from our work was a pattern whereby people at protests and funerals were dispersed using gunfire. Now,
how did you see that? Were you there? Where did you hear? You were there, were you?
We saw.
You couldn't figure it out in your own country, even though you live in your own country, but you could figure out what happened in Syria. Is that right?
If I can describe the videos that we saw,
But many of them were faked, though, as we proved multiple times on YouTube.
Well, let's let Phelan finish the point, and then Mimi will come to you so you can make some points now that the sound is much better. Please do continue, Phelan.
I think it's very hard to fake 50 people trying to hide behind a car.
But who shot who? You're still not answering the question. How can you tell?
My job.
I mean, there was guns in those protests.
My job at Storyful, our job at Storyful, is to verify that video is where it says it came from, when it says it came from. We don't know what happens before the camera was turned on. We don't know what happens after the camera is turned off. That's for sure.
Can you refer to me to one video, please?
I
remember at the start of the conflict.
You really don't have to talk
banter,
to
isn't it? Because
please, one at a time. Phelan, I'm interested in this point. Please describe to our viewers. Wait, Mimi, we will come to you. Mimi, please, we will come to you. Phelan, if you could describe to our viewers what you saw in those videos, because this is critical to people understanding how and where this conflict started.
Well, what we saw was that gunfire was used to control protest situations with large loss of life.
Mimi, now you evidently contest that. You've been interjecting. Please make your point about the origins of this conflict, where people were shot, or as we know, at these gatherings. Please make your point. Oh, and now we cannot hear you, Mimi. Your microphone seems to have cut out. Yasmin, we have had so many technical problems. I can only apologise to our viewers at home for the technical problems we've had today. Yasmin, could you please describe to us how your understanding of where the origins of this conflict came from? We've heard from Phelan that people were shot during gatherings in which they were calling for regime change and reform. What is your understanding of how this conflict started?
I agree with Rami completely, and Phelan, I think they've definitely got the right idea of what's truly happened. It was, in my eyes, from my view, it was just civilians who wanted little reforms, and the government came at them and clamped down on them very, very strongly, so more and more civilians rised up against a government like any country would do. And that's my personal feelings on it. I would like to ask one question though, for Mimi. Mimi, have you been in Syria during the conflict at all?
Mimi, if we can hear you and you can answer that, that would be great.
Can I just ask that?
Someone's muted her voice.
Oh, okay, she can't hear. I mean,
she can't hear. Mimi, maybe check your microphone top
right.
No,
she's trying to tell you that it's you that's muted her.
Oh, okay.
We haven't got any microphones, Mimi. We're trying to get your voice on the show.
Not really important, I guess.
So yeah, I do apologise. Mimi, if we can get you back, that'd be awesome. We've now lost Rami. It's been so difficult today. We've had so many technical problems today. We're really sorry to anyone who's watched for the technical problems we've had. We will be doing more about Syria soon. We've made so many contacts during the process of making this show that we want to make another show about Syria, and that is something that we will do. So stay tuned for that. Thank you to everybody who's left a comment on the YouTube video here. Thank you to all of our contributors. Stay tuned for more stuff on Syria, and we will see you again this week. And we have another debate on Thursday live at 7 p.m. We have Truthloader Investigates live at 4 p.m. on Friday. And next week we may have a special in which we broadcast away from the Truthloader studios and we go out on the road. Details on that are sketchy at the moment and we can't reveal too much, but that is something that's quite exciting. So thank you very much to all of our contributors. Thank you to everybody who watched, and thank you to everybody who left a comment on the video. Follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and make sure you subscribe. We'll see you again next time.